Ladies and gentlemen, building on over 2 decades of leadership in the innovation space, the Council will release its final report, Transform, capturing insights from a 2-year collaboration with the National Science Foundation. To begin this conversation, please welcome the Director of the National Science Foundation, the Honorable Franz Cordova.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back with the Council again. So I only have half a voice, I'm afraid. I left the other half in Stockholm a couple days ago. I was very privileged to get to attend the Nobel Prize ceremonies because the National Science Foundation has supported the 3 physicists that won the prize for the discovery of gravitational waves for 40 years. And I think that's a good place to start. It's good for all of us to appreciate just what a high-risk, high-reward investment is all about. So that was a progress of technology and super-duper engineering challenges that had to be overcome. A lot of people, as you might guess, came and went, and it involved multidisciplinary teams of people who did the numerical relativity using supercomputers so that we actually knew when the first gravitational wave was detected what the source was, that it was 2 colliding black holes that were in a close binary system. And the most recent gravitational wave detection, because there have been several, 2 neutron stars merging. So it's, but it was a very long tail. Of course, there are many NSF directors, many NSF program officers involved. National Science Board changed over a large number of times during that interval and had to approve all the funding. And then, of course, Congress, of course, is the ultimate arbiter of our appropriations, and making the decision to continue an investment that nobody was quite sure would have a result. So how risk-taking is that? We all knew that Einstein had his stuff right, and so we could expect that accelerating masses somewhere in the universe would produce gravitational waves. But when the calculations were done, the difference, the little jiggle that the Earth experienced for just a fraction of a second was so very, very small that that who would have guessed 100 years ago, when Einstein predicted this would happen, that we'd ever have the technology to find something so incredibly technically challenging. So since the observatories have been built, we have 2 widely separated in the US, one in the state of Washington in Hanford and one in the state of Louisiana at Livingston. And now there's also another observatory in Italy near Pisa. That we can now narrow down where the locations of the sources are. And in order to achieve such a technological triumph, a lot of engineering had to be done in successive waves, and all of those have produced outcomes that are now being enjoyed by startup companies and others who just would have had no motivation for going in those particular directions without the motivation of trying to nail this effect down and make this detection. So we don't know where it all will lead. It's just in its first exciting moments, but apparently the Nobel Prize Committee thought it highly enough of it to award the prize to just 3 of the actually thousands of people who have worked on it. Do you know, on the latest paper, there were 3,500 authors, so that amount of print takes up more room than the actual article itself, just to identify the authors. Well, I want to introduce the subject of this next session, which is this booklet here, Transform, which is just very beautiful. And it's about an initiative that NSF was privileged to fund called Exploring Innovation Frontiers Initiative. And I want to give a shout out to Pramod Karganagar, who was the head of our engineering directorate at the time, a few years ago, when we made the decision to fund this. Pramod's gone on to UC Irvine now, where he is a vice chancellor for research. And during this time, there have been several workshops around the country, and I'll say a few words about that, and then you'll hear from two of the people that were greatly involved in those workshops more about this. So let me make, now that I've kind of introduced the subject of basic research leading to innovation and leading to engineering applications, let me make some more formal remarks. And I'll just begin with a quote from our inspiration, meaning the inspiration for the National Science Foundation, Vannevar Bush, who believed that, quote, there must be a stream of new scientific knowledge to turn the wheels of private and public enterprise. So that a man, Vannevar, was a very, very smart, prescient person, could look way, way forward. He was asked by President Roosevelt at the time, just after the Second World War, to write up a statement of why it was important to have scientists and engineers involved. They'd been so successful in helping with the wartime effort, why it was so important for them to be involved in the peacetime effort. And so at that time, as you heard in this quote, he's talking about the importance of private and public enterprise and how there needs to be a new streams of scientific knowledge constantly feeding into that. And that really is the basis of the National Science Foundation. It's continually looking to support new discoveries and new discoverers, because it's the people, of course, that make the discoveries. And keeping that engine going is really the source of all innovation. We heard at some of the workshops around the country, and you'll hear more about it from the next group, about the importance of diversity and inclusion of discoverers and how that was vital into ensuring that we had always a plethora of new advances, and that we were really tapping all the potential that the United States has. So flowing from that founding spirit, NSF's funding has resulted in countless advances for U.S. citizens, and really worldwide, from Doppler radar to MRI scans, from the internet to nanotechnology, from Google to barcodes, from computer-aided design systems to tissue engineering. As I go about the country and the world, I'm always amazed by the numbers of people that come up to me and say, thank you, NSF gave me the first grant that I ever had. And now I've gone on, Department of Energy, NIH, NASA, so forth, funds me for my more mission-oriented work. But that very first grant, like in gene editing, we were the first grant to the originators of gene editing, the first grant for 3D printing. And I think Vannevar Bush would be very pleased today to see that for the first time this past couple of months, since we moved headquarters from Arlington, Virginia to Alexandria, Virginia, that we had made a statue of Vannevar Bush. It's hard to imagine that a person who had such a decisive impact on science and technology 70 years ago, that there are no statues of him around. So we investigated, and we found in the basement of an outbuilding of the Smithsonian, there's one that stands about this tall, and of bronze that was made back in the 1940s with a number of other famous people. And the Smithsonian wouldn't give it to us, so we 3D printed it. And I think Vannevar, it looks just like the real thing. You have to come visit us. It was all painted bronze and nicely toned and rubbed in the right places. And so Veniver is back at his home at NSF, and I think he would have had no idea what 3D printing was about, but I think he would have been very pleased to see how technology brought him back. Our consistent backing of high-risk research and our support of initiatives such as the engineering research centers that number more than 30 around the country, the SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research Program, the I-Core Innovation Core Program, which is now all over the country and helps graduate students and even undergraduates become entrepreneurs very quickly, and our 10 Big Ideas, which is our signature vision for the future now. They all signify our longstanding commitment to innovative breakthroughs that have been critical to the nation's economy, health, and to keeping us a global leader. The same entrepreneurial ambition drove the creation of the Council on Competitiveness, an indispensable foundation purpose to find avenues to robust economic growth in the face of serious global challenges. I'm going to be speaking later this afternoon at a forum on philanthropy and science and innovation, together with Francis Collins, head of NIH, and Michael Kratsios of the White House. And it's being hosted by the Science Philanthropy Alliance. Mark Kastner is the head of that. And I'm going to use the Council on Competitiveness as a great example of bringing public and private entities together successfully to drive innovation through discovery. So organizations like the Council have consistently encouraged a national climate in which science and engineering discoverers have adapted to new changes and continued to thrive, and centuries of progress have led us to the verge of new frontiers of discovery. But we still have a lot of challenges. And we face all sorts of concerns at home and abroad. And of course, we have the very big challenge of educating and inspiring future innovators. And I think that's why a lot of people at the National Science Foundation, a lot of people at the Council and in this room, that's one of our major concerns, is how to include and inspire them so they can in turn inspire the world. We've navigated a lot of major barriers in order to come this far. So the question is, how do we as a nation continue to explore the next frontiers? Our history has shown that American discoveries and discoverers have consistently driven innovation. And as the place where discoveries and discoverers begin, that's our motto for NSF, we know that the same determination to discover is what will secure our future. To address this challenge, NSF has partnered with the Council to come up with creative approaches in pursuit of transformative discoveries, and that's why this is called Transform. 2 years ago at Georgia Tech, Deborah Wynn-Smith joined me in announcing that the National Science Foundation had awarded a grant to the Council on Competitiveness to launch the Exploring Innovation Frontiers Initiative. The EIFI, as we call it for short, was organized as a series of national dialogues on how to drive U.S. competitiveness in the decades ahead. So we had at all of the venues, the dialogues around the country, representatives from industry and academia and national labs and research institutions. We had labor leaders, key opinion leaders, all gathered together. And these led us to examine the transformative innovation models that address looming global concerns. Dialogues touched on fostering environments conducive to discovery, on ensuring diversity and inclusion in America's future talent base of inventors, and analyzing specific technologies to help drive innovation in that future. I also had the opportunity to attend the opening dialogue in Atlanta, as I mentioned, and the final event in St. Louis. I want to take a moment to thank our host sites, Georgia Tech, University of California at Riverside, Texas A&M University, and Washington University of St. Louis, and the many people in those areas who worked hard to make EIFI a success. Being part of those dialogues is why some of us who are specifically here this morning are very excited about this. Today, the Council is going to release this final report capturing insights and recommendations from the last 2 years of dialogues. And I'm interested in hearing about the proposals that will keep our nation competitive in the generations to come. This upcoming session should have some enlightening insights for us all. And I'd like to just end with a quote that's in this report here that I found when perusing it. I just actually received the final report yesterday. So it's under the summary section, it says, as a major source of federal research and development funding in the science of innovation and active participant in the U.S. innovation ecosystem, the NSF brings an invaluable perspective on the current state of the art in models of innovation. Moreover, the NSF is the only federal agency unconstrained by a subject-specific mission, and thus is the natural partner for a topic as broad as innovation. And I really hadn't thought of it that way before, that our strength is in our breadth, that we span all areas of science and engineering, and we do so because you never know where the next great discovery is going to come from. And we need discovery in order to be at the root of innovation. Innovation is nothing without all our discoverers. So thank you to all who've been part of this dialogue. Thank you to COC. And now please help me welcome our group of speakers who will be talking about the specific dialogues and their outcomes. Thank you very much.
To discuss insights and findings from the report Transform, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Council's President and CEO, Deborah Wynne Smith, the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Washington University in St. Louis, Dr. Holden Thorp, and the Chancellor of University of California, Riverside, Dr. Kim Wilcox.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cordova, for your remarks and your leadership. We're really thrilled that you're leading the NSF and all the things you do for our country and the world. Thank you so much. Well, I think we'll just jump right in to talk about some of the findings and excitement and energy that came out of the two dialogues that you both hosted. We'll maybe start with you, Chancellor Wilcox, because when we went to UC Riverside, fairly new university in the famous University of California system, we were really focusing on the talent continuum and how to get more Americans into the innovation journey for our country. And not only was everybody excited and thrilled about the new models you're creating, but I think we took those learnings back into our own world, and of course they're very much reflected in our report. So I'd like you to, start wherever you want, but tell us what, really is unique about your university. We purposely went to UC Riverside because you are a new model, and then kind of share with us some of the findings and where you think we should go from here. But start.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks so much for making us a part of this. Let me do a little bit of context and purpose and need. If you're, I noticed in the Clarion Call, predictive analytics is one of the top perceived technologies in advanced manufacturing. We do advanced predictive analytics in universities as well. And if you want to predict a high school student's likelihood of success in college, and you had to choose one data point, what would you choose? You wouldn't choose high school GPA. You wouldn't choose SAT score, ACT score, numbers of clubs in high school. You'd choose the family's zip code. And the zip code is simply a proxy for family wealth. If your family is in the upper quintile of income in America today, you have a 6 times greater likelihood of graduating from college than someone equal abilities in the bottom quintile of intelligence, or of income. We can't afford to leave that much of America behind. If you're an African American and you get into college, you only have a 40% chance of graduating from college. So for Riverside, the lesson is about a lot of programmatic changes and things we do, but the real story is deliberateness. Decades ago, our university was deliberate about recruiting students from across all sectors and helping them graduate, supporting them in ways that make a difference. And the impacts, I think, are starting to grow in America today. We're starting to see that kind of deliberateness in lots of places. There's an American Talent Initiative that is 80 universities across the country that have the express purpose of helping students from low-income families graduate. Dr. Crow and I are part of the University Innovation Alliance, 11 universities that banded together 3 years ago with the express purpose of increasing the numbers of graduates from college from lower income families. We've increased the number of graduates in our 11 universities by 25% already in 3 years. And those are stories about deliberateness. But we're not done yet. A place like this, the council, is so crucial to combining the efforts of the academic world and the private world. And I have a challenge, or I guess a challenge for our corporate partners. If you go on the websites of most of the major Fortune 500 companies and identify their key university partners, you'll generally see the same list of schools, the ones that we think of as the elite universities in America. And the elite universities are trying to catch the elite corporations, You don't see East Carolina. You don't see UNC Greensboro. You don't see Cleveland State. You don't see universities that really are embracing the diversity of America today. So if we're going to change the leadership of the nation, and if we're going to really include all of America in the innovation economy, we have to find ways collectively to be deliberate. And so my key lesson from Riverside is deliberateness.
Well, Kim, thank you. But would you also share with us what was the magic, what was the strategy that you all developed and deployed at Riverside to get women and a huge number of the Hispanic population moving through STEM and into graduate school? I mean, we saw that, and everybody was blown away by it, actually.
I talk about two key pieces. There are lots of them, but two key pieces. One is the simple notion that you can make a big university small. You can't make a small university big. And by that I mean we've taken our 23,000 student university and created small living and learning communities for groups of students that really support them and you feel connected. For families who send their students to college and no one in the family has been to college before, there's a lot of, oh my goodness. But in a small group, you can kind of find your way through it. The other piece I talk about is Riverside. In much of America, we talk about leveling the playing field. And that usually means sticking a program under one corner, an institute under another corner, or an initiative. Riverside did it completely in a holistic way. We built the field in a way that all parts, the faculty, the staff, the student body, the graduate student, everybody is embedded and motivated by the same set of values. And so it's ubiquitous. Each of our pieces fits together in a way that's whole, but that, again, is deliberate.
So turning to St. Louis, the council had a very exciting activity with Washington University in St. Louis soon after our National Innovation Initiative was concluded in 2004. And there were many challenges in the city and the region around entrepreneurship and startups and building the ecosystem. But now, St. Louis has been named one of the startup capital. You've gotten tremendous energy and momentum and results in driving this entrepreneurial culture that depends on great universities. So, Holden, please share a little bit about, that journey, because again, the entrepreneurship path, Washington U and St. Louis really set us very much ahead in understanding your new models and what's going on in your region.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for letting us host the event. It was an honor to have you and Dr. Cordova there, and really was a chance to bring together a lot of people to kind of celebrate some of the things that we've done. First, I'd just like to second everything Kim said about access to higher education. It's critically important, and I commend you in the clarion call. You have on page 5 a chart that I wish everybody could see that will help with this sort of corrosive rhetoric that Michael Crow was talking about earlier, that just shows how much better off people are if they go to college. And I thank the Council on Competitiveness for helping us get that message out. And and doing all the things on access that the Chancellor was just talking about. But as far as St. Louis and the ecosystem is concerned, we're a very proud city with a magnificent history, and Washington University is compelled to be an important part of that. And I think a lot of the things that have happened, long before I got to St. Louis, a lot of people in the city came together to create a Cortex Innovation District, which is where we had our meeting, and which has really come along now to have a lot of different startups and other kinds of parts of the economy, and bring back a part of the city that everyone wanted to focus on that's strategically located. And that's something that came about because 15 years ago, some people who really cared about the city sat down and said, let's get this land and let's figure out how to engage the universities and start things. When I came along, we were looking to make WashU a better partner in all of it. Universities are called on by the Council on Competitiveness and lots of other places to promote the innovation economy, to get our discoveries out into the marketplace. We had been doing a little bit of that at WashU, not nearly as well as we should. And some of the things that we do, one is to make sure that our policies for doing all this are as smooth as we can make them. We can do a lot on that, but it also, as has been said many times today, comes down to the people. So one of the things that I've tried to do is to attract a team of people to work with us on this that have been both in the academic world and in the business world, because these two worlds speak very different languages. And if you're trying to bring people together, of course you need everything that France Cordova just said about the basic research. But as I tell my colleagues who think they've invented a billion-dollar drug, I have to remind them that it's not a billion-dollar drug until you've sold it for $1 billion. And most of my academic colleagues have no idea how to sell a billion-dollar drug to Big Pharma. And so bringing people who can bridge that is incredibly important, because no matter how good your policies are, no matter how excited you are about your region, you're going to have hiccups, and the only way to get through those hiccups is to have people who've been on both sides. Now, I think the other thing that we've done that's been really good is attracting the CIC, and there's some talk about that in the report, and they just do a great job, and we were very lucky that the very first place they came, the CIC, which is one of the great places where lots of startups can get going, that the first place they chose to come was St. Louis after they decided they were going to get away from the operation they've had in Cambridge. So we've got a lot of new startups going. As you say, we've gone enormously up in terms of the number of startups in St. Louis, but we're also pragmatic about what's special about St. Louis and what's good in other places. I tell people, I tell the people who are gung-ho about the city, I remind them, it's better to have a startup that moves and succeeds than one that stays and fails. And so it's important to have a kind of pragmatic sense of that. We want to keep as many startups in St. Louis as we can. Not all of them St. Louis isn't the best location for all of them. So we hate it when they leave, but we want them to succeed. And if we're pragmatic about that, we'll end up keeping more successful companies in St. Louis in the long run. And
you alluded to some of the regulatory reform at the university that has expedited this. And last night at our dinner, the director of NIST was telling me that they're going to be launching a whole new review looking at Bayh-Dole and some of the things that need perhaps a new look after some 30 years. But just quickly, what do you think you did that was very important in changing the status quo and how you do business?
Well, for startups, something that I really believe in that I've put in place at two schools is to have what we call at WashU the Quick Start license, which is something that's pre-negotiated, and the founder can come in, and if they want to do the Quick Start license, it's determined the equity and the royalties and all the clauses about indemnification and all of that. They're all there, and rather than spend a year negotiating that agreement and coming to exactly the same place you would come to if you did it this way, we present this to folks and give them the opportunity to take advantage of it, and almost always they do. And I put this in place at North Carolina before I came to WashU, and we've gone from having 2 or 3 startups a year to having more than 10. And I think that's a big part of the reason. And it's not just that it's easier to do, it also is kind of a symbol that the university, we're willing to give up a little bit of upside that we might have gotten if we spent a long time negotiating in order to get things out there and get them going and partner with the venture community and the startup community.
So one thing I want to ask both of you before we run out of time here is this whole challenge from startup to scale up, and where we have the largest venture capital resources in the world. It tends to be, as we know, located on the West and East Coast. What have you done to kind of change some of the models to attract and grow the capital to enable this transformation in your regions? And what do you think we need to be doing going forward? Who wants to start? Yeah.
For us, we're on the West Coast in a broad geographic notion, but we're 60 miles from the coast. And between us and the coast is Caltech, UCLA, UCSB. And so we actually, ironically, have a challenge recruiting the capital that much further east, just the 60 miles. And so we've taken a very holistic approach to centers that have faculty mentoring, peer support in the industry, venture capital participation, and created our own little ecosystem, in a sense, in Riverside around the university to attract the venture capital. But we have, just as Dr. Thorp, we have companies who the investors will invest in the company if we move it 80 miles to San Diego. They just don't want to leave it where it is because they live in San Diego. So there's still a challenge even near the coast where the money is.
So geography matters still.
Geography still matters.
It's the same thing in St. Louis. We've helped the venture community in St. Louis produce capital that can be used for our companies. We prefer a model where we invest in, the university invests in local venture capitalists, and we let them decide what investments they're going to make. We think that makes sure that the market is providing the kind of discipline that it can. So we've helped a number of venture capital sources in the region so that they have the money that they can use to develop companies that stay in St. Louis. But as I said before, I think you have to have a blend. You have to have some Silicon Valley investors who invest in us, and yes, some of those companies may, just as Kim said, have to move, in our case, a little further than they would if they were leaving UC Riverside. But some of those will be able to stay in St. Louis with out-of-town investors, and then some of our local investors can invest in companies in St. Louis, and we hope a lot of those will stay. But capitalism dictates where successful companies are going to be, and you can't fight that. You have to do as much as you can to try to increase the odds that will keep companies in St. Louis, and we do that by helping the venture capital sources, but also partnering with venture capital firms all around the country.
And the large-scale, big global companies.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, this is very important.
Yeah, whenever we talk about tech transfer, we tend to focus on startups because that's sort of the glitzy thing. But of course, for most licensing revenue that comes into universities comes from licensing to large corporations, to big pharma, to ag companies, to technology companies. And so that part of tech transfer is very, very important as well. And we have to make sure that same things, our policies and the way we deal with corporations and the inside is done as professionally as we can.
So in the time we have left, I'd like to ask each of you, building on what we accomplished in the dialogues that you so kindly hosted at your universities and going forward, what issue would you really recommend the council double down on as we move forward on the next platform for national and regional innovation and wealth creation and job creation, and also having that thriving curve going forward in America? Kim.
From the talent engagement side, I'd offer this. To many high school students in America today, technology means coding. It's simply writing software, which is ubiquitous. We have to have software, but there's a whole bigger world out there. And we have to collectively, and I think this is a public-private role as well, we have to help those students appreciate all that technology is. I'm looking at my friends from John Deere and what we're doing in the world of plants. We're putting nanotubules in plants that call your cell phone when they detect explosives in soil, because plants are sensitive to things in the soil. That's technology. And yes, coding's important, but that's real technology. And so we have to help the students of America see that opportunity for the innovation space.
And move beyond the so-called app economy into solving real problems.
Yep.
And both of your universities, interestingly, are very much at the forefront of this merger of biology and agriculture and precision and all of that. So it's very exciting for dealing with the issues Dr. Khan talked about last night on sustainability and food. Holden.
Yeah, I'd say some similar things, but I think the focusing on the talent production and helping America realize that higher education is producing the talent that the corporations need and that startups need. And we've heard so many encouraging things from Sam Allen and other corporate leaders at this meeting about how much they need our talent. And we've got a huge challenge as a country. And higher education has to own part of it, just as Michael Crow said this morning. We have to make sure that people feel welcome and want to engage with us and understand what we're doing, and so we can explain it to them. And so I think the most important thing for the innovation economy, I mean, of course we want the universities to be producing startups and licensing our technologies, but making sure that the young people that are coming to our campuses with all of the different backgrounds that Chancellor Wilcox was just talking about, making sure that those people are thriving according to the metrics that Gallup has very adroitly pointed out. Making sure they really engage with their professors and they're really excited about their courses, and they have a mentor in the university who's taken an interest in them, helping us promote that. That is by far, but that's the multiplier effect. We can do stuff in St. Louis, we can do stuff in Riverside, but if you want to multiply it for the whole country, you got to make sure that the people who are coming to our university are setting the world on fire when they leave.
Great, thank you.
Now joining Ms. Winsmith on stage to formally launch the Council's National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness, please welcome Dr. Mike Crow, President, Arizona State University, and University Vice Chair, Council on Competitiveness, and Dr. Mehmood Khan, Vice Chairman and Chief Scientific Officer of Global Research and Development, PepsiCo, and Industry Vice Chair, Council on Competitiveness.
So, thank you both for your tremendous leadership of Arizona State, of PepsiCo, and being in the leadership of the Council on Competitiveness. And I think we'll just jump into why does it matter right now, at this time in our history, for the Council on Competitiveness to bring together our leaders from industry, academia, national labs, and labor unions to really launch a next generation national focus and commitment on innovation frontiers, and what thoughts both of you have on what are some of the new strategies, the new models, the new problems that together we can really advance by bringing, the thought leadership and the action leadership of our country together around the innovation future. So let me start with you, Michael, because you were involved with us when we did the innovation initiative that was led by the CEO of IBM, Sam Palmisano, and the president of Georgia Tech that led to the American Competes legislation. But that was over 10 years ago, and the world's completely different. So what are your thoughts and ideas for moving forward around this imperative?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I think people somehow don't realize that economic competitiveness and economic success does contribute greatly to social change and social success. These are powerfully interconnected things. And as the world economy has grown to the point now where you've got world GDP at the highest level, that is world per capita GDP is unbelievable and is moving forward like it has never moved forward before. That means that we, for the first time, have a truly globally competitive market on all levels in all things. That means then that the 70 years of advantage that the United States has had since the end of World War II has reaped us immense benefits, but has put us in a position now where we have to huddle, bring everyone together from the labor sector to the industrial sector to the academic sector, and in a new world with ubiquitous computing technology, with ubiquitous connectivity, with all the things that we didn't have 15 years ago, that we definitively didn't have 40 years ago, all of the strategies that worked in the past are insufficient for what's needed in the future. So it's the exact moment, just at this exact moment, where we have felt the impact of the Great Recession, where we have felt the impact of social media, where we felt the impact of the new generation, the new millennials coming on, all these things coming together. What Mehmood was talking about, the need to advance all of our food and energy and water systems in sustainable logic with sustainability as a core objective, all of this is coming together. And the old models, the old simple corporate structures, the old simple college and university structures, the old views of labor and the way that labor might view the world, those are old and no longer adequate. And so it's time for a new playbook, new plays, running new plays, new assessment, new measurements, everything. And so we need to, this is a perfect time for renewal. We do have to find a way, I mean, as powerful as the economy is apparently performing at the moment, it's not powerful enough. We need 4% sustained economic growth year after year after year, with some years at 6 and some years at 7, if possible. And that there are large countries that are able to pull that off. If we can't pull that off, it's going to be difficult to secure the level of resources necessary to drive up the standard of living for the entire population, as opposed to just fractions of the population. To do that requires a reconceptualization. We need to not be overly self-confident or self-assured that we have a $20 trillion economy and we can just sort of wipe our hands and be done with it and move forward. There's no reason that you can't drive all of the potential of the American people to the highest level. It's just that the old designs have run their course. So now is the moment for the new designs to be put forth.
You know, I, as always, agree with Michael on this. Let me come at it from two directions. One is, we think of historically linear progression, and when we project out of what we need to get done 5 years, 10 years from now, the reality of it is the future is not an extrapolation of the past. The trajectory is completely different, and so looking at the past, analyzing it is helpful, but extrapolating it will get you in a completely wrong place. That's the first thing. The second is, and when I went to medical school, you know, as an example, we were talking earlier, there was medicine and biology, and there was engineering over here. And it was rare that the engineering students ever talked to the medical. In fact, we used to make fun of each other, let alone the faculty, heaven forbid, talk. Move forward 30 years. Most of the developments that are going on in life sciences are actually happening because of the physical sciences. And most of the problems, other than big civil engineering, that engineers and mathematicians are working on are actually in the life sciences arena. And the irony of it is, over the last 100 years, if you go back 100 years ago and take a look at what were the top challenges for humanity: security, water, access to food, health. 100 years later, guess what it is? It's the same issues. The difference, one way of looking at it is we haven't made any progress. Of course we've made progress. But today we're dealing with, within those categories, brand new tools that are going to have to leverage capability of multiple institutions from multiple backgrounds and the convergence of that talent. What we uniquely can do now is bring that convergence to bear. And I think this opportunity is just one more loud voice, hopefully, that wakes people up and says, don't sit on different sides of this. You're going to have to converge your thought, your resources. No one company is big enough. And frankly, no one country has the resources to solve most of these big issues. The last 100 years, we haven't been able to really solve them. We're going to have to work together.
Well, I'm thrilled you used the word convergence. And I want to talk a little bit about that and how we really elevate that theme and that platform for the work of the Commission. And I want to take 1 second to just quote from the Transform report, because while we think that we can't learn from the past and we have to think of a new way for the future, this is very interesting and we sometimes forget it. And I quote, "American entrepreneurs and venturing investors leverage the convergence of rail, oil, steel, and electricity to drive American industrialization, agriculture, profoundly changing the country and ushering in a new era of U.S. industrial might and jobs in the 20th century. Convergence in the 21st century, digital, bio, nano, cognitive. How are we going to address that in the context of this commission and ensure that we have inclusive participation of our citizens in creating this new age?
It's going to be challenging because the last time that you mentioned, rail, steel, et cetera, those were all Edisonian-oriented industries. They were built on trial by error, geniuses, inventors, unbelievable know-how that was brought to bear. They were generally not scientifically based. All of the ones that you just mentioned are scientifically based. Deep science. They're based on fundamental mathematical understanding, fundamental physical science, fundamental biological science. And in the old model of that convergence of the past, it was easier for the general population to grasp and understand because you could see it, you could participate. Heat it, bend it, beat it, make it happen, plow it, grow it. It was easier for the general population. So I've been arguing for some time that in the new economy around the things that are converging at the moment, it is necessary, and there's substantial resistance for this, that everyone has to get to a certain level of scientific and technological literacy. They don't have to be scientists or engineers. They have to be literate in understanding what these things mean. The gap that we're experiencing now with people questioning basic scientific theories, with people questioning fundamental 1,000-year-old accumulations of knowledge about how certain things work, that is a sign that this is not an area where we're going to see alignment without substantially re-engaging the educational process, rather than retreating from, well, I think high school graduates, I'm hearing this now, high school graduates in the future don't need to know algebra. Give up on it, it's too hard. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's not even about algebra. It's not about the literalness of algebra. It's about teaching people to solve for unknowns in complex settings. That's what algebra is about. So I'm not arguing that everyone has to become a scientist or an engineer. I would argue that a convergence-driven economy on science-driven technological platforms requires a reconceptualization of how we educate everyone. Now, this is almost impossible for everyone in this room to understand, but it used to be the case that people sat in the room and argued about whether or not people should be literate, whether or not it was worth the investment to drive people to understanding how to read. Now, imagine that, just for a second. That is a true moment in history. Likewise, going forward, we're going to have to now rethink how to build a modern, rapidly changing, technologically driven, scientifically underpinned society, and that's going to require a different level of educational underpinning.
I'm going to build on it, but give an industry perspective. And I want to just raise 2 points. One is, and I say this having spent 20 years of my career as an academic scientist, I think scientists have got to put their arrogance behind them. I think there's been this tradition, because I'm the expert in X, Y, and Z and I have deep knowledge, you're not good enough to engage in the, and I'm not suggesting you're saying, you're not good enough to engage.
I couldn't agree with you more. The science priesthood
and
is
bad. I'm the ivory tower, and so people have felt left out of the conversation.
Absolutely.
It isn't just the feeling of left out, but we've actually missed opportunities. We have to not only ask ourselves, can we do this? And I mentor a lot of my own scientists in the company now. You have to ask the question, should we do this, and what are the consequences of this? And all too often, scientists left on their own will start to work on things without thinking through. I'll give you a very quick example. I had the opportunity of looking at a project where somebody said we could take a crop that right now is grown around the equator, and we could actually transform it genetically to a much healthier, much more resourceful crop. And I asked the question, I said, that sounds great. We can solve the health problem from this crop. What do you think is going to happen to deforestation of every rainforest in the world if we unlock that genie? That's a question of, should we do it? Or what's the alternative we should be working on? So some of this convergence in my mind is not just convergence of technologies, but convergence of the thought process and the thinking of the different players and the stakeholders that come and actually prioritize. We don't have indefinite resources. What should we be working on? How should we be working on, and who the stakeholders at the table? Without that, we're actually going to perpetuate and repeat the problems we've had, and society won't give us the license to operate. They'll not trust us.
So let me just augment that and agree with that wholeheartedly. This has been one of the errors, the priesthood of science in academia and the separation from actually understanding and thinking through the impact of what's done. We started a couple of years ago the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and we brought together a couple dozen faculty members who are trying to put forth the intellectually based, philosophically based notion of responsible innovation as an outcome of everything that we do. Not to cut off where science goes, but to make certain that we're always conscious of where we're going and that we're always connected to the people that we're needing to be connected to. There's a philosopher that's had an immense amount of, here we're going to sidetrack to philosophy and an innovation announcement, but Phil Kitcher at Columbia wrote a book called Science, Truth, and Democracy, where he said that science without moral purpose is, in fact, without purpose by itself is an immoral act. And he's not saying that scientists are immoral. He's saying that there has to be some purpose to what one is working toward. So we've reached that realm where now our driving businesses, our driving technologies are scientifically underpinned, and we don't have everybody connected to this. We don't have everybody understanding of where we're going. And so to be more successful, we're going to have to figure that out.
Thank you. And when we look at convergence, as we build out and begin to structure the commission, the ethics and values, I think, are going to be very important to weave through this. And I know our time is running out, but I want to ask both of you, if you can think forward 5 years, kind of what do you, and even less, what do you hope will be an outcome of the work that we're launching under the National Commission in terms of the future of our country and our role in the world?
From my perspective, we need alignment about what it's going to take to drive an economy forward that doesn't leave half the population behind, disconnected in deeper and deeper realms where people are arguing to maintain jobs and roles that aren't even economically viable. And so that requires us to rethink everything, to work together in ways that the council really provides for, where industry and national laboratories and universities and labor unions and other kinds of educational institutions and work organizations can come together. We need an alignment. We do not have that alignment right now.
Dr. Khan.
I would say, as Michael has said, we have, for the first time in history, an uncoupling of wealth creation from job creation. Right. This is the first time that that's ever happened. So we have the brains and the capability to figure this out. There are lots of applications necessary, which leads to me what I hope is going to happen. In the next 5 years, we leverage all of our technical know-how to actually bring to bear and focus on multilateral problems which are impacting not one country. This is not a case of us versus them, but multiple countries. Nobody's in isolation. I always remind my environmental scientists, we all breathe air from the same environment. We'd better protect it together. This is not about their problem, our problem. Most of our challenges actually are going to be global challenges, not single country challenges. Do we have the wisdom to come together?
I'll just add one thing, because I often get people pushing back saying, well, you're about constraint and control and somehow you're going to lower economic opportunity. It actually turns out that if we can actually figure out how to build this collective way of thinking, the economic opportunities are far greater than anything that we've seen up to this point. We've actually been economically limited by thinking in these more separate boxes than we should be.
So we think about convergence, these tremendous challenges, opportunities, and a core mission of the Council on Competitiveness is really how to raise the standard of living of our citizens and be leaders in the world. So inclusive, sustainable competitiveness will be an outcome of the work of the Commission. And I want to thank you for both of you assuming the leadership for industry and academia, and all of you who have an interest. We look forward to working with you. We're very excited. We're going to team with the National Governors Association and other leaders to really build this out as a next platform for our future. So thank you so much, and the work will begin next year.
Yes.
The latest collaboration between the Council and Deloitte explores the tremendous disruptions and opportunities in the next generation of manufacturing technologies. To share insights from this study, please welcome the chairman of Deloitte LLP, Mr. Mike Fucci.
Good morning. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. And it's just fascinating the last couple of conversations, listening to everything that we see and hear in today's world is actually backed up by a lot of the research that we've done, which always works really, really well. Deloitte has really enjoyed an incredible partnership with the Council for Competitiveness for the last decade. And we believe we have a very deep synergistic relationship because we kind of have the same vision. We actually believe in the whole concept of the future around talent and making our country more competitive and adding more jobs. And so I think it's because of that, if we go back over the last decade and, oops, did I hit the wrong button? Okay. Oh. I'm missing the slides, but okay. Over the last decade, we've actually collaborated on a number of important initiatives. First, in 2010, 2013, and again in 2016, we surveyed senior executives and CEOs around the world around what does competitiveness mean around the manufacturing standpoint. This study that we did sought to really define excellence in manufacturing and draw out the implications for manufacturers and the competencies required to develop and sustain the new competitive landscape. We also had a chance to conduct face-to-face interviews with CEOs to gain perspectives around what is going to be critical to improving the competitiveness through everything we do. So we've produced something called the Ignite series. So we have Ignite 1.0, which actually was what the output of what I just said was. We've also worked, the second piece of output was working with American university presidents, and then the third was with American labor unions. So over the past 6 years or so, we've looked and produced some research over across different spectrums, which all support the area of competitiveness. It is no surprise that there's a lot of similarities across all three, including actionable recommendations about the right steps for the country. And as a result of our research, we believe the basis for transformational change throughout many companies in the manufacturing industry started. And we're real proud of that, and I think that it helped raise the game on how some companies looked at the future around competitiveness. In our 2016 Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Index, we conducted with the Council, manufacturing CEOs ranked nations in terms of current and future competitiveness. One of the things that was amazing about the results here was that for the first time, the US is projected by the end of the decade to be the #1 country, taking over from China, around competitiveness, which is a fantastic result for us. It also was an important note that 10 of the 15 most competitive nations in the future are based in Asia. So two very, very important, pertinent facts that came out of this whole concept of what we're seeing in the future. So what are the drivers of manufacturing competitiveness? With our collaboration with the culture, we've explored the key drivers through a competitive landscape. Manufacturing executive, once again, cited talent as the top need. And hearing the last couple of panels, and my background is in our human capital practice. So what's interesting is I've always said that for many, many years, that talent does actually drive strategy. And it was great to see that that is still the #1 concern. And matching the availability of the skilled talent we need with actually the skilled workforce. In areas like engineering and manufacturing, the aging workforce is just not getting replaced with enough skilled labor. So the biggest issue out there, and we totally agree with that, is the fact that talent and the mismatch of having enough skilled labor in those areas. Second was cost competitiveness, and I think people would absolutely agree that that was probably up there. In a more sluggish economic growth, containing cost and increasing productivity is important to boost profits. So it is real critical that that stay as one of the most important things that we need to continue to work on. And third is actually workforce productivity. Companies are continuing to move forward toward higher value and more sophisticated products and processes. And so workforce productivity was the third thing that came on the list of things that are important. The other thing that was very interesting was that the traditional developed nations manufacturing, such as the US, Germany, and Japan, the ones that have high labor productivity, they seem to be winning again in the eyes of global executives. So there's a consistency in the actual part of the world, this where the concept of productivity is actually leading. These nations are back on top on global manufacturing competitiveness, and we expect them to remain there through 2020. But with that said, and again, what I heard earlier, we are rapidly evolving. The landscape is changing. And if you want to stay as an employer of choice, you really need to realize that what you did to retain, create talent isn't the same thing that's going to happen in the next 10 years. It's a much, much more difficult task. Walls are falling down. Countries are coming together. Globalization, it's a lot more difficult to actually retain, maintain, and create the talent that we were able to do years ago. And because of that, talent is going to be fierce. So most companies, it's going to be really, really difficult to get exactly the talent we need. And building it is going to be key. And just the latest Clarion call, I totally agree that the exact phrase was technology to trade skills. There's no issue in which the council members are more united than a desire to progress on building talented, diverse workforces. We've seen this through our research, and we've seen it in every day. And that concept of talented, diverse workforces, that I think is really, really key. And when we talk about diverse, the concept of diversity to me is diversity of thought, as well as diversity of ethnicity and gender. And so that it's really a broad-based, different way of thinking. And I think that's going to be the key, in my estimation, to how companies can succeed over the next decade, is literally how do you get a diverse workforce in diversity of thought. The other thing that we're seeing, and the research have proved, has been the concept of ecosystems are going to be very, very important. And developing everything yourself is probably not going to be the way of the future. We see it here at Deloitte. We see it all over in our clients, where it used to be that every organization wants to build everything they need. With the way technology is going, you don't need to do that anymore. There's going to be an incredible amount of partnerships and ecosystems developed, and that is going to be the way of the future. Is, even in product development, there'll be more teaming with technology firms and other type of firms. So the development of ecosystems is key to the next decade. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, and with that, the landscape is changing. So if you look at technology, the word that we like to use right now is we're in exponential technology growth. And you'll see the report that we're going to talk about a little bit is really around the concept of what got us to where we are today is not going to get us in the future because of technology. I like to use this analogy. A world will not experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. At the rate it's going today, it will be like 20,000 years of progress in the next 100 years. And if you actually believe that, a lot of people don't believe that, but if you actually do believe that, that's what we think that's where it's going to go over the next decade. Manufacturing is not about just making physical product anymore. Swift consumer demand is changing. The marketplace is changing. The nature of the products are changing. And so when you put all that together, that's why we call it more of an exponential increase in development. Again, we agree and support many elements of the Clarion Call, including the fundamental notion that innovation-driven productivity is the foundation for a growing, vibrant economy. So interesting is there's a company called Singularity University, which we've done a lot of work with, along with the council. And I actually took our Deloitte board through a day at Singularity about 3 months ago or so to talk about the whole concept. I call it governing over disruption. And it's hard enough to manage disruption. How do you govern over disruption? And I'll tell you, spending a day there was really, really interesting, because I left there almost in a very uncomfortable state, because there were so many concepts that were talked about what the next 10 years could look like, that I left there thinking, how are we going to actually govern over stuff that is going to be hard to even manage? And so it did leave me with a couple of sleepless nights for a couple of days as I thought through it. But I looked at it and said, we all have to look at this as not telling us why it's not going to work, but assume it is going to be this way. And I think if we do that, that's going to be the key to how success happens. They like to use kind of 6 Ds. Disruptive, deceptive, digitized, democratized, demonetized, and dematerialized. And those, I think there's a catchy six Ds. And that's kind of the concept of what the exponential technology and exponential futures look like. And Singularity University does a really, really good job of pushing that forth. So as we talk about the study that we're underway right now, Exponential Technologies and Manufacturing, it really brings together the Council, Deloitte, and Singularity, as well as broader manufacturers and technology ecosystems to take a fresh look at how our current technology is actually transforming the future. So if you believe what I said earlier around the fact that ecosystems are going to be the way of the future, if you think about it as being a partnership among lots of different organizations, that's kind of the way of thinking about it. So that's what we're doing right now in our study. Our objective is to focus on how global manufacturing companies can best tap into the transformational shift to evolve, to grow, and actually to thrive. Help manufacturing executives assess and utilize kind of the most promising future technologies and capture value. So that's, the study is underway right now. And we are doing this internally at Deloitte. So I always believe in you need to do it see it yourself before you could talk to others about it. And we've been using things like robotic process automation and analytics for a while now to develop and change some of the core services that we actually provide to our clients. And I actually believe, if you believe that, that's going to be, we've seen amazing change and success in that over the last couple of years. So what have we seen so far? So the preliminary survey has shown that it requires thoughtful, engaged, and brave leadership. I think a lot of people engage in this conversation and hear it, but it actually is going to take resources from each manufacturer to actually believe this and invest in it. So taking resources and actually putting them on the journey here, not just talking the talk, but walking it. Know what problem you're trying to solve too. There's a lot of hype around advanced technologies. Know which ones actually make the mark for you directly. So it's not just everything you hear out there. There's amazing stories you read every day. You see in the news, you read research on, but everything is not going to be effective. There's overwhelming technologies. How many days you just get a new request for a new app to come on your phone? And so some of the things are going to make sense. Some of the things are not going to make sense. I'm a big believer in entrusting small teams to innovate on the edge. You've heard that term before, innovate on the edge. And really is almost protect a group of people to actually innovate and not worry as much as the direct immediate P&L for that particular product. If you allow innovation on the edge and then bring it in, we've seen that as one of the ways in which companies are going to actually be much, much more successful. I think this one makes sense. It's actually very hard to do in an economic period where you're trying to manage earnings. But it is something that we see coming out of the survey. And then operate outside of the traditional walls. Keep your thinking broad. Don't say why, don't say why, say why not sometimes. And I think that's another thing that's coming out is this concept of looking at it with almost a different paradigm. And lastly, just raise the national dialogue on this to be an enabler. We're hearing it a lot. I think the more people talk about it, I think the more everyone is going to see that this is the way of the future. So I think as each of us go back to our day-to-day jobs, kind of remembering that how we operate or how we operated to get to this point, we may have to operate a little bit differently in the next decade. So with that, I thank you for being here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
For almost a decade, the United States has seen an unprecedented surge in both non-renewable and renewable energy resources, turning what was once an economic and national security weakness into a strength. To discuss whether we have leveraged this opportunity for U.S. manufacturing at the federal, state, and local levels to maximum effect, please welcome Mr. Sam Allen, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Deere & Company, and Chairman, Council on Competitiveness. The Honorable Rebecca Blank, President, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Walter Copan, Undersecretary, Standards and Technology, U.S. Department of Commerce, and Director, National Institute of Standards and Technology. Mr. Steve Stevanovich, Founder and CEO, SGS Holdings, and Member, Board of Governors, Argonne National Laboratory. And Mr. Bill Bates, Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff, Council on Competitiveness.
Great, well, welcome. Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. I know there was some slides that were supposed to go along with that, and I apologize for some technical difficulties that prevented that. But we'll see if maybe those are something we could share with folks after the session today. So we're going to talk a little manufacturing for the next 20-25 minutes or so. And we've touched on a lot of the topics that I think we're going to get to in the next in this session. But I think looking through it specifically through this lens of manufacturing is an important step to take, particularly as this has been something the Council has been so focused on over the last really decade of work. You know, back in 2009, the Council issued a report that concluded that energy is everything. It's the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. 3 years later, we issued another report specifically on manufacturing. While we were doing that report, the entire landscape of the energy situation in the United States changed. And we went from discussing energy scarcity and security to talking about low-cost energy abundance and even independence. This was due largely to the proliferation of the fracking movement. And it was something that we wanted to explore as an organization, the implications that would have across various sectors of our economy. So over the last couple of years, we've looked at the aerospace sector, energy, advanced materials, biosciences, agriculture, to try and really understand what's happening out there. And the question that has always sort of pervaded our work has been, are we leveraging this tremendous opportunity that we have with low-cost abundant energy to capitalize on America's manufacturing capacity? So I have a terrific panel with me here today to try and get at that question, looking at some specifics within that scope. What I'd like to do maybe is start with you, Becky, because we've talked a lot about talent over the last couple panels here, but now I wanted to look at it really specifically thinking of the manufacturing space. And over and over again in each of these sessions, whether it was agriculture or biosciences or aerospace, it comes up that we're not ready, we're not finding the talent we need. And we've heard some of the discussion today about the need for diversity, expanding the pool. But first of all, are you seeing this as well in your sphere? And are we doing the right things about it, looking at the manufacturing opportunity?
Yeah, so we have absolutely growing demand for engineers, for computer scientists, for people in a broad number of areas. Wisconsin is a heavily manufacturing state, and I regularly hear from employers saying, we wish you could turn out more. We need more. I should note that, of course, this is a very diverse pipeline. It goes from everything to two-year people trained seriously in various technical skills, through BAs in engineering, through PhDs with very advanced research abilities in biotech. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to this. And if you're going to grow the internal pipeline, as I think Michael Crow noted earlier, it's a long process, right, for particularly at the higher end. So a couple of things. First of all, and I know the council has talked about this at times in the past, it will take time to expand the pipeline inside the United States, and the only alternative to that is buying talent from abroad. So, I'm not going to say anything more about it, but an intelligent, skills-based immigration policy ought to be number one on the list, right? Because that's the only short-term solution to some of the shortages that firms are experiencing. That or they're going to move out of the United States. And, the lower cost energy, of course, is a reason to stay here if you can get the talent together. Let me talk about building the pipeline, however, internally. And there's one thing that I'd say I think is on all of us. We've got to make manufacturing and the science and the technology that goes into it a little bit more sexy out there in the public conversation. I hear regularly from, you go talk to people who are in the business schools or even engineering schools, and they don't see what they think of as old manufacturing as very attractive. Well, now, everyone in this room knows there's not very much old manufacturing left in the United States. Most of it is really exciting high-tech manufacturing, and that is the edge of where U.S. manufacturing is going to grow and remain. But students don't understand that, and their parents don't understand that, and they get very little exposure to the manufacturing sector unless their parents have worked in it or they've been in a town where it's present. And so we have a lot of students coming in, and when you say, gosh, you ought to think about careers in science and engineering that can lead into some great jobs in manufacturing, and they sort of look at you and say, why would I want to do that? And that's a marketing media campaign in part. And I know that there are a number of companies, when you look at the ads, who are trying to do that. But I have to say, I think at some fundamental level, we have to do more of that just to attract more people to be thinking in junior high and high school. This is actually a pretty sexy and exciting thing to do, all right? Now, having said that, once they get to college, there are a number of things we need to be doing. And one of the most important of that is the information that you give to freshmen and sophomores when they're choosing majors. I think we do a pretty good job of that in our professional schools, if you're in engineering, or if you're in business. But most schools, that includes us, I think, in the past, have done a pretty lousy job of that for the majority of our students who are in liberal arts degrees and looking around and not sure what their major is going to be. They have no idea what they can do with a major in mathematics, or what they can do with a major in physics, or what they can do with a major in social sciences or communications that can lead them into some really interesting jobs. So we are trying very hard to push career-related information, bring in alumni, bring in local companies from Wisconsin in freshman and sophomore years of college to try to get people there. Finally, two other last comments. One is that I regularly talk to manufacturers about the fact that they need to come in and advertise themselves on campus early. They can't just show up when people are graduating as seniors. Oshkosh Truck, great company, growing company, lots of DoD in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Most of my undergraduates have never heard of them. No idea why they should want to go work for them. They're not going to know that when they're at the end of their senior year. That company has to be in some of the departments and schools at Wisconsin early, getting their name out, sponsoring competitions, doing internships, and that's on the companies. Finally, the last comment, and a number of others have made it. If we want to keep this talent pipeline going, we've got to have the sort of federal dollars, particularly for the high-end, high-talented researchers. A vast majority of federal dollars are spent in training students and in paying students to be part of research projects, and that's how they learn, and that's how they end up being the inventors and the innovators that we're going to need to keep high-tech manufacturing in this country. And as others have said, and as your document here says in front of you, we've got to keep the dollars in basic science that is just so crucial, not just for invention, but also for the talent pipeline as well.
Great. Sam, are you seeing challenges in hiring up and down the skill spectrum, from the PhDs to the entry level? Are you having trouble finding people all up and down?
Yes, very much so. We've had it for quite some time at the high skilled level that we've been talking about. For us, more than anything, it'd be embedded software engineers, but we certainly have found it in a number of different areas there. But now, as we've ramped back up production, us and our supply base, the number one thing that's limiting us is getting a talent for our manufacturing operations. And we're having a real hard time getting people to come back into these jobs. So it is definitely a challenging factor right now.
Absolutely. Steve, maybe I can turn to you. Another issue that has come up repeatedly in our meetings across all these sectors of the economy has been the ability of startups, entrepreneurs, even small and mid-sized businesses to get access to capital, to be able to get the idea out of the lab, to get the small business scaled up to a mid-sized business. What's your perspective on how's this looking right now? How is the capital market as far as potential for manufacturing?
Well, I'm actually optimistic for a number of reasons. One of them, for example, is the fact that historically Silicon Valley has seeded information technology companies.com. But if you look at the last several years, they've been moving towards other sectors such as manufacturing. For example, the aircraft sector, which is one that I follow closely. Just in the last several years, Silicon Valley firms have funded 22 aircraft companies to the tune of $350 million. And a lot of that stems from Silicon Valley companies such as, say, Uber with Uber Elevate, Google, going into those sectors, and thus the Silicon Valley funds sort of follow them. And so I think if this trend continues, it's going to be like a force multiplier to manufacturing. The other thing also is because of the last couple of decades of investment by Silicon Valley into infotech, one of the things that you see that's very interesting is that the social media and internet infrastructure has made it much easier for companies, small companies, startups, to actually access and find investors. You know, through social media sites like LinkedIn, for example, they can reach out directly to an investor or someone who can introduce them to an investor, someone who can help them place their product. Crowdfunding, for example, where you can say, I want to manufacture this and I'll give you a discounted price if you put down a deposit that I can use to manufacture the product. So that's another interesting. The other thing that's also happened is there has been a proliferation of sort of seed infrastructure. So I already mentioned crowdfunding, but for example, accelerators. They're everywhere now. My University of Chicago, for example, now has the largest accelerator in the Midwest. And they've invited national labs to join. So Argonne National Lab is part of it. Fermilab is part of it. Even other universities, such as University of Illinois with their engineering school, has become part of it. And what's interesting here is that even, for example, the military has gotten into the game. They've opened up offices in places like Silicon Valley. The Army Research Lab just opened an office at the University of Chicago Accelerator. And then even large Fortune 500 companies more and more are setting up venture arms where they did not have those before. And so, for example, in the energy space, you now have Saudi Aramco Energy Ventures. So an entrepreneur somewhere in the US can actually access money in Saudi Arabia and China and so forth. And then the final point that's interesting to me is over the last 3 years now in a row, venture capital funds have raised over $50 billion each year. And the reason that's important is that size makes it easier for institutional investors to actually now start to participate more. And that's going to add a lot more fuel and growth as well. So I'm pretty optimistic as far as how easy it is to access capital.
So the comment Deborah made earlier about the focus on the app economy and the quick short-term gain, you're optimistic that there is the money there for the longer-term actual product-making thing, entrepreneur.
That's correct. And even things such as, for example, crowdfunding enables smaller investors to participate, so it even broadens the investor base in that way as well. You know, you still have to sell someone on your product to get an investment, but I think it's easier to find those investors now.
Got you. Walt, representing the entire federal government up here on the panel. What's your perspective on the role that NIST, obviously, which you're the director of controls, but the federal role in enabling advanced manufacturing and really trying to create the right environment and the rules of the road that are going to really accelerate this area?
Thanks, and thank you. It's great to be back with the council, and thank you for the work that you do and your advocacy for the role of government in driving innovation and driving manufacturing advance. the U.S. is doing well, but there's so much more to be done. As has been mentioned by other speakers, the competitive dynamic of our world has shifted dramatically. And so whether we look at the advanced manufacturing institutes now through Manufacturing USA, this was the only area in the previous several clarion calls that actually got an A grade. And so that's a wonderful thing. NIST, of course, as I think some of you know, is the lead on the advanced manufacturing initiatives for the nation and has a role to really coordinate the public-private engagement, the engagement with leading industry, the engagement with the entrepreneurial community, with academia, and driving workforce development. And that's an ongoing theme. And so these manufacturing institutes, the leverage of the manufacturing extension partnerships has had a tremendous focus on bringing capabilities from publicly funded research into direct use, into prototyping, access to user facilities. So through our federal complex, it's a great leverage that we provide for the nation. I was pleased to preside over the 50th anniversary celebration of the National Center for Neutron Research, which has been used in advanced materials optimization and studying biological systems, in particular to optimize biological drug manufacturing and systems control. So we really see ourselves at NIST as a convener within the federal government to bring all of the federal sector together with stakeholders in the public side as well as in corporate America, as well as within academia. I believe that we see ourselves as the nation's laboratory for industry. And so addressing all market verticals, I've had, I think, some great conversations with folks within the high-tech sector who've basically said that without the metrology to guide the creation of the internet infrastructure that we have today and looking to the future of 5G and wireless and other standards, this nation would have been a decade behind the rest of Europe, for example, in the development of those capabilities. And so I've had folks from Corning and Intel and Hewlett-Packard come up to me and say, thank you for the work that you've done in the federal sector to help drive U.S. innovation, manufacturing, and technology transfer. Deborah mentioned a little bit earlier in her comments that tech transfer is one of the many tools that we have access to. It's enabled so much innovation in this country. But as a representative of the federal laboratory system and from the Department of Commerce, we've also identified opportunities to enhance this for the nation. I would challenge the Council to engage as we kick off a national initiative under NIST's authorities for the Bayh-Dole Act and the Federal Technology Transfer Construct. It's going to be time for us to revisit where we are today and how we can move forward in an increasingly connected world who have copied the Bayh-Dole Act. They have copied the national manufacturing institutes that we have. We just had a meeting with a major delegation from China who said specifically they come to benchmark NIST to see how they can replicate that in Asia. So we have, I think, an opportunity for challenging U.S. competitiveness as a network, and I look forward to engaging with all of you on that.
Thank you very much. If there were two issues that came up in every single one of the sector discussions that we've held over the last 2 years, they would be talent, which we've talked about, and the other one would be the implication of the Internet of Things to the manufacturing process. And it came up in two ways. One was the tremendous potential efficiencies of knowing the amount of energy, the amount of water that you're using in the process. And the other was the downside, the potential for cyber attacks and manipulation by outside entities of these new sensors. Just be curious, and I know we're what stands between everyone and lunch, but this issue cuts across industry, academia, government. So I just open it up to the panel for any thoughts on how do we capitalize on the good side of that and minimize the bad.
If I just kick that off, as some of you may know, NIST was asked because of our leadership in the national cybersecurity framework, as well as in systems interoperability, to take a look at the Internet of Things on behalf of Congress. This is, it's a huge upside and risk management through the driving of the framework and testing interoperability and vulnerabilities of systems in an open, transparent, but also industry-sensitive way is critical. For example, we have as our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence a test bed for the smart grid and for advanced manufacturing systems to be able to have the leaders of industry technologies to be able to work together, but then also to privately understand what their systems are doing, how do they work together, and what are the vulnerabilities that they experience. So we really see that this is an area that's going to need top-level leadership in this nation to drive the awareness and then also the creation of a new workforce in addition to new standards to enable our country to take advantage and harness the opportunities around the Internet of Things.
Right.
And I would just say that there's, you know, we spend a lot of time with our students talking about things like Facebook posts are going to come back and haunt them, and they have to be careful about how they use certain current media. And I think the growth of the Internet of Things is going to create an enormous need for universities, for everyone who works with younger people going out into the workforce, to be aware of how all of the devices with which they live can be used in ways that can harm them and can harm their families or places where they work. And increasingly, I know at different points of the university, we're training staff about all sorts of issues of how you are careful with regard to cybersecurity. I know a lot of other companies are doing that as well. The Internet of Things takes this to a whole nother level, right? And most of our staff, and certainly our students, are completely unaware of the risks that will be run.
Em, did you have a thought on that?
I would just echo what already has been said. You know, our view, we're in the process with the Internet of Things of connecting every part of our value stream, from the customer back through the dealers, back through our factories, all the way back through the supply base and second tier and third level. Tremendous upside opportunity with it. And as was indicated by others, our number one threat we see everywhere, including John Deere Financial, is cyber. And it's a risk that you have to manage. You're not going to get away from it. And so you better dedicate resources to it. You better stay on top of it. Stay vigilant, because it's here. And the only way you're going to mitigate it is to stay on top watching it.
Absolutely.
The only quick comment I was going to add is that I think that the same blockchain technology that's driving, you know, Bitcoin to tulip bubble levels is also going to be a big part of that solution. So.
Fantastic. Well, interestingly, or importantly, two topics, cyber, Bitcoin, cashless economy, are on this afternoon's agenda. So it sounds like we're talking about the right things. Let me thank the panel. This has been a terrific discussion. Really appreciate it. Can I ask for a round of applause, please?
Please join us for a buffet lunch in the foyer. Our luncheon keynote will begin promptly at 1 p.m.